Awesome. We'll get this started. Welcome to today's Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practices Assistive Technology Solutions ECHO. I'm Leo, the project assistant for Project ECHO. And just as a reminder, we are recording this ECHO session for educational and quality improvement purposes. So by participating in the session, you are consenting to being recorded. So if you do not wish to be recorded, please disconnect from the session. And again, as you're joining, please remember to put your contact information in the chat. ECHO is a participatory and interactive community where presenters, stakeholders, and community members all communicate and interact and support each other during these sessions. This can either happen through the case presentation at the end of the didactic, through the chat when we're sharing information or resources, or through those case narratives. Again, just a great way to network with each other. And just a quick privacy reminder, let's remember to please avoid real names or identifying details when sharing examples. If you're unsure, just remember you're always free to check with a hub member who we should all have an asterisk by our name, and we're always here and we're happy to help. This just keeps our space safe and respectful for everyone. There are three key components to an ECHO session. Our first component is the didactic presentation, where today we're having Rhonda Miller and Randall Bagley present on AgrAbility and the great work that they're doing up here at USU. And Kent Remond is going to be our second component of today. He'll be presenting our case presentation, and he's also an Assistive Technology Solutions Hub member. And our last component is, again, just that professional networking that happens throughout this ECHO session today. And this is how to rename your profile. If you don't remember, you just click those three dots by your name in the Participants tab, and you click on the Rename option. And the raising hand function is just really helpful if you don't want to interrupt the person speaking in a case discussion room or during the presentation. I just think it's a great function to use, and they have it in the Reactions tab if you'd like to use it today. Now to go over some quick session etiquette. Let's remember to please respect the presenter by using the chat or raising hands to contribute when the presenter is speaking. Let's also keep our questions brief and on topic, as it really helps everyone get into the conversation, and it also assures that we give our presenter our full attention and our full time. And if you could, please just introduce yourself and your organization before asking a question. And last, we do always encourage you guys to turn on your camera if you can. It really just helps us connect over this virtual session and helps us just see each other. And I like it. I think we just get to know each other a lot better. And for a credit for attendance for attending today's ECHO session, so Janelle Preston will be dropping a survey link throughout the chat. And by filling out that survey, you can earn a certificate of attendance for participating in our ECHO session today. Many of our participants actually share these certificates with their employers or supervisors as documentation of ongoing professional learning. So to receive your certificate, just make sure to complete that survey, and we can get that sent over to you after the session or next month. And then remember, our Canvas page is where we post our additional resources, past session recordings, and just a lot of great things on our Canvas page. So if you'd like an invite to that, remember to email projectecho@usu.edu, and we can send you an invite and get you set up on the Canvas page so you can view all of those really great resources that we have. And here's just another plug for case studies. It's just a great opportunity to share information and get some help on maybe a difficult case that you've been working on or that you have on your caseload. And it's just really great because you get to receive a valuable feedback and in this case recommendation form. And again, if you want to look at those case recommendations, you're always welcome to email projectecho@usu.edu to view the case recommendations that we've had in the past or to set up a case presentation that you'd like to present. And again, remember to follow us on social media. We have a Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn page. If you scan those QR codes, it should take you to our social media pages. And again, just thank you for being here and participating in our Assistive Tech Solutions ECHO. And I'll hand the time over to Rhonda and Randall.
Okay. Hang on just a sec. Let me get this squared away. Okay. Can you see the screen okay? And hear me?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, great. So As Leo said, I'm Rhonda. This is Randall. We'll be talking about AgrAbility of Utah. And AgrAbility of Utah is a program that's designed to help farmers and ranchers with disabilities remain in agriculture. It was created by Congress. There's special legislation authorizing the AgrAbility program, and that that was brought to fruition based on the realization that there's a big gap between the rural communities and the disability resources. And a lot of farmers, if they become injured or as they age and they have limitations and they can no longer farm, or they need to access disability resources for their family members, many of those rural areas are so far away that they end up giving up their preferred occupation, and because those two don't meet. And so the AgrAbility program was created by Congress, and so I will talk about that here in just a minute. Whoops. No, we don't want to. Why does it not want to go? Well, let's do it this way. Okay, so AgrAbility is, as I said, designed, created by Congress. It's funded through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And it's part of the requirement is that it has to be a partnership between the land grant university and a nonprofit disability partner. In Utah, we currently partner with Roads to Independence, one of the independent living centers in the state. We've had different partners over the years, but that's a mandate. Not all of the states have an AgrAbility program. It's a competitive grants program, so every 4 years we apply and you compete against everybody else. And if you're selected, then you have that program for 4 years. It's kind of a hard way to keep a program going, but we've had this program at Utah State since 1998, so we're doing well on that part. This does not want to advance. So again, the purpose of AgrAbility is to help farmers and ranchers facing limitations due to injury, illness, disability, or aging remain in agriculture. One thing to really note is that what we consider a disability as far as the AgrAbility program is concerned is anything really that limits their ability. So it can be just arthritis as you get older and you can't turn or move as quickly. It does not have to be what many people think of as a disability where you are in a wheelchair or have an amputation. That's it's it can be things that most people and most farmers especially don't consider a disability. AgrAbility was really designed to just be that link between the rural areas and the disability resources. We do not actually get funding to purchase assistive technology to help the farmers, but our grant funds are to help provide our services for free. So we can go out and do on-site farm assessments, excuse me, and evaluate their whole process, watch them climb on and off tractors and things and see what those limitations are. And that there's no charge to the producer for that. That's what our grant funds pay for. But we do not have funding to actually pay for the assistive technology. Oops. Okay.
Yeah, and so there are several reasons why we have the AgrAbility program. And one of them is that farming and ranching can be a very dangerous occupation. As you can see in this chart here, that the injuries incurred are quite a bit higher than that in all industries. If you're working with crops, a lot of times you're working with machinery that can be very dangerous. And if you're working with cattle or any type of livestock, that can also be very dangerous. So unfortunately, livestock causes many injuries and deaths every year in the United States. And it's estimated that in the state of Utah, there's between 8 and 11,000 people in farm households that have some type of disability. And this chart shows a lot of information, but the main thing I want you to get from this is that those that work in agriculture tend to be getting older and older. And this is a trend that's been going on for quite some time. A lot of farmers are staying in the field longer than they want sometimes, and we're seeing fewer younger people get into it. So the age of those in agriculture is increasing quite a bit. And that also shows it in this graph also. And it's just uh, kind of amazing the difference in average age. The average age of all U.S. workers in the United States is 42.2 years, but those in agriculture is 58.1. So that's about a 16-year gap, which is very, very significant. And of course, as you get older, you're more prone to injuries and it takes longer to recover from that.
Now, who do we serve? We serve farmers and ranchers, of course. We also help if they have a family member that has a disability. We work with those family members. So oftentimes it may be a child and they need more services or they need to be able to have the child kind of function or thrive on the farm to some degree. And so we work with the family members also, although most of our clients are actually the farmer or rancher themselves. And we help anyone who's facing a limitation due to chronic illness, injury, the disabling conditions, or aging. Arthritis is a big one for us. As they age and they get arthritis, they're also not nearly as quick or nimble on their feet, and that leads to a lot of secondary injuries, falling, and things like that. They do have to be, for us to work with them as part of the AgrAbility program, a producer, an existing producer, not somebody who wants to become a farmer. And they need to produce produce that or goods that are valued at $1,000 or more annually from their agricultural operation. Now, anymore, that's not much. Back when that was initially created, that level, that was quite a bit. But that's the USDA guidelines for being a farmer or rancher is you have to have $1,000 of gross income. For our AgrAbility program, they need to operate land in Utah, and we also then do work with their family members. Now, farmers and ranches are really very unique. If you didn't grow up on a farm or ranch, you may not quite realize just exactly how different they are from many operations. But their farm operation typically or oftentimes runs out of their house, and so they use their house as, as their office and Grand Central Station oftentimes. And so their are also part of their business. Farms oftentimes are multi-generational. So you may have a grandfather, a father, and their kids all farming together. And oftentimes those farms are passed down from generation to generation. We work with farmers that are the fifth generation, fourth, fifth, or sixth generation on that farm. There's huge, huge pressure, even though nobody's saying you have to keep it, for them to maintain that farm. And that creates a lot of stress for our farmers oftentimes, especially if they're struggling financially. It's it's really hard for them to be the one that failed and lost the family farm. The other thing is just the structure. Oftentimes, as you pass the farm from one generation to another, the they the parents will divide the farm among all of the siblings. And so then you may have some siblings that live in town and are working versus one or two that are working on the farm. And that can create a lot of issues, especially on the decision making and whether or not to purchase equipment and what crops to grow and things like that. And then the other thing about these farms and ranches is they're oftentimes in very remote locations, very far away from services. And that creates a lot of difficulties trying to access those disability resources. Another thing to realize about farms and ranches is that they don't really get to set their market price. Unlike a business where if their costs go up, they will typically, they can increase their price. Farmers and ranchers sell their commodities on the open market, and yet they buy all of their products, the fertilizer, the seed, or feed for the cows is, bought retail, and then they really have no control over the sale price other than just they're guessing the best time to sell and watching the markets and trying to predict whether prices will go up or down. The weather can have huge, huge impacts. So Many of you have probably noticed that we have a pretty good severe drought going in Utah. It was really bad a few years ago. Looks like it's going to be equally or worse, equally bad or worse this year. It's just, and that creates a lot of issues because then especially the range ground, it doesn't produce as much. They don't have as much feed for their cattle. Many of the irrigation companies, we have some in the southern part of the state that already cut off their water basically around Memorial Day. Their irrigation water ran out that fast. There's just so little water in the reservation or reservoirs, even if they do have irrigation water. And so the weather creates havoc with that. And those farmers oftentimes work really long days, much, much more than 40 hours a week. I grew up on a farm. I can guarantee you 40 hours a week was not even a consideration or a possibility. That didn't happen. And seasonally, you can be extremely busy. And so when they're planting or they're harvesting, especially, it's very time critical. And so they will put in really long days because, especially if they're trying to plant in between a rainstorm or harvest in between storms, they're trying to get that done and they will put in some incredibly long days, which also creates some safety issues because as you get tired, you're more likely to make mistakes and end up being injured. And as Randall mentioned, the retirement age, most producers keep working pretty much until they no longer can. A few will retire, but it's very seldom that they're retiring at what is considered a normal retirement age. They tend to be work much longer, and they also tend to be very, very independent and very quiet about their personal information. They will typically not mention that they have limitations if someone even suggested, or if we go and talk about farmers and ranchers with disabilities and their response is, well, I don't have a disability, even though you can see that they're hobbling and they can barely walk because they have so much arthritis. They're certain they don't have a disability. And so these things make it very difficult in many ways to work with farmers and ranchers. Oops. The other thing to note is that the farm ranch income is oftentimes very low. In general, agriculture is not a high-paying job, which is partially why we don't have as many kids going back into the farm. It's also an expensive occupation to get into because purchasing land is not cheap. According to the Ag Statistics Service, the 22 census, the average farm income was $30,809. That's per farm. Realize that some of those farms will have two or three producers on it, and it also includes really large farms. So, like Circle 4, especially when it was functioning here, and full scale in southern Utah, that that would count as a farm. And so those are going into those averages and really skewing that average up a lot. And yet, when you break it down a little bit further, only a third of the farms reported a net profit. Two-thirds of the farms reported a net loss, with the average loss being a little over $20,000. So that shows you that the income is not great. Now, there are things that, as they purchase, oftentimes any money they get, they put back into the farm. So that does kind of skew the numbers a little bit, but farming is not a high paying occupation at all. Whoops, I lost that. There we go.
Yeah, so these are just some of the few services that we offer with AgrAbility. We'll do an on-site assessment. We'll give recommendations for technology and safety, and we also will do service coordination and refer to mental health services. Every once in a while, I'll have a group such as the FFA that will want to do a service project, and I'm happy to let them help out a farmer that may need some help. So that's one thing that we'll do. When we do an assessment on the farm, we'll go there and just try to identify the barriers, what's causing the problems, what's making it difficult to farm and ranch and do your job. And we'll look at the equipment, we'll look at safety issues, we'll look at maybe restructuring different tasks. We'll look at funding options and also look at other people that might be able to help in their situation. Here's a couple pictures of some farm equipment that needs some help. There's a tractor seat that is very worn and needs to be replaced. There's also some steps to a tractor that got bent and smashed in. So these are just a few examples of equipment that needs to be repaired and fixed so that they can do their job. When we do the assessment, we'll get authorization from vocational rehabilitation. We'll go in, we'll do a very in-depth survey. We'll find out as much as we can about the farmer, rancher, find out about his past employment, his education. We'll look at his ranch and farm and see, how big is it? What crops does he farm? What animals does he have on it? How does he irrigate it? What help does he have? Is it just him, or does he have hired help or anyone else that can help him? We'll look at the viability of the farm. We'll often check his Schedule F records to see how he's doing, if he does have a profitable, viable farm. We'll look at his disabilities, the conditions that limit him, and just see how that affects his farm operation. And then we'll recommend different types of assistive technology that may help him on the farm. This is a picture of a farmer that has a skid steer, and a lot of them are very hard to enter. This one has a side entrance that makes it quite a bit easier than most of them, in which you have to enter up through the front windshield, which is very difficult for a lot of people. These are a few things that we and mobility devices such as ATVs. They help farmer get around on his farm. They're a lot easier to access than a ATV in which he has to swing his leg over. They can also carry quite a bit of equipment. They can get around and go places that a pickup sometimes can't make it to. Backup cameras and mirrors are very good assistive technology items. A lot of farmers have difficulty seeing their exactly what's behind them and in their sides here. So if we can add cameras or mirrors, that helps them out significantly. Tractor seating, a lot of older seats have very poor suspension. And so if we can upgrade and get a newer seat, they're going to feel a lot better at the end of the day and be able to farm for many more hours. Other things that we may recommend would be vehicle control. Sometimes a farmer may have a bad arm, bad leg, and if that interferes with the controls, if we can move them to a different position where his good arm or good leg could operate them, that's going to make him be able to operate his equipment. Irrigation equipment in the middle, you can see some wheel lines, and wheel lines are run on a motor here that moves them across your field, and they are a lot easier to move than hand lines. I moved hand lines when I was younger, and that's hard work even for a 13 or 14-year-old. I did that for many years, and if you're a 75-year-old farmer, that's tough work, but wheel lines are so much more easier to use when irrigating your fields. And on the right side of your screen, you can see some livestock handling equipment. This is called a calf catcher. This is a piece of equipment you can hook up to a UTV. You can go out and you can catch a calf, and you can be with the calf away from the calf's mother cow. Mother cows sometimes get very protective, and it can be very dangerous if you're out there trying to vaccinate or brand or do something with a younger calf. They can injure you. And so this is just a very safe, protective piece of assistive technology that allows you to work and vaccinate a calf without interference from the mother cow. We try to work with different organizations and have a good uh, referral with them, a good rapport with different organizations. We work with organizations that deal with agriculture, people in farm and ranch, and also with those with disabilities. So hopefully if they come across someone that we can help, that they'll send them our way, and vice versa. If we find something that another person can help with a farmer or rancher with a disability, we will send them their way. And so we just like to have a good working relationship, let them know about our program, and have them refer potential clients if they can. We also have a lot of information as far as safety is and fact sheets. So if we can help them in that manner, we're happy to do that. Our services are confidential, they're free. On the picture on this tractor, you can see it's been replaced with a handrail and some steps that are a little closer to the ground. After this was put on this tractor, it was a lot easier for the farmer to access and get into the cab of the tractor. So this is a very good example of assistive technology. We try to go to outreach events where farmers and ranchers may be, let them know about our program, see if we can help any of them. We have resource facilitators that cover the entire state of Utah. And so we try to get around and cover the whole state, even though we are based in northern Utah in Logan.
Okay. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about AgrAbility and the vocational rehabilitation program. So I mentioned earlier that Roads to Independence is our official nonprofit disability partner, but we have even listed in our proposal or our grant application that UATP and VR are basically informal partners for us. They're both wonderful resources for us. Vocational rehabilitation is really how most of our clients get funding for the assistive technology. Congress did not give AgrAbility funding for assistive technology. They said, oh, we already have disability programs that can help with that. That's vocational rehabilitation. We're just supposed to be that link in between. And UATP is a wonderful resource for us. We work with very closely with them. We really enjoy that. So again, just our program started in 1998. Our headquarters are up here in Logan in the northern part of the state, but we do cover the entire state. As you know, we have a cold, semi-arid climate, which means that we primarily have for crops, alfalfa, hay, small grains, corn silage for rotation, and a lot of our producers, many of our producers have livestock. Livestock are a huge cause and source of a lot of injuries and disabilities, and so that's one thing that we have to kind of watch for. Vocational rehabilitation really is our primary source of funding for the assistive technology. There are things such as the low interest loans or real small little grants from UATP and UATF and things like that, but most of it comes through from VR. Now, when we first started back in 1998, and we would identify that our farmers could use services, that they had disabilities or limitations, and we'd try and work with VR to help get funding for the assistive technology. And we ran into so many roadblocks. And one of the biggest ones was just how to even account for the farmer ranch assets. Because oftentimes the counselor would say, well, if you sell your tractor, you could get the UTV that you need to get around. Well, you need the tractor to run the farm. Or if you would sell some land, you could buy the assistive technology that you need, but you need that land base to be able to produce enough to make a living off of it. And so it seemed like we spent so much time just going around and around and around on that. And we finally worked out a VR farm and ranch policy, which we was formally established in 2010. So it took us 12 years to get this process outlined, but it has made a huge difference because now they know they have a policy that says that the farmer ranch assets are not to be counted as available funds or that you shouldn't be selling the land or selling equipment to pay for the assistive technology. And so then they look at the general farm income for the rest of it. But this made a huge difference and has really helped us get more of our clients so that they can have services and get funding through VR. So as we work with vocational rehabilitation, our partnership has just gotten stronger over the years. We've now, for many years, we have quarterly meetings and we meet with the upper administration every quarter and we just, it's very informal. But if there's any little issues or anything that's just starting to maybe become an issue, we can address it. We can get clarification as to how VR is interpreting some of their rules or their limitations or restrictions. They can understand more what we're doing. It's worked out very, very well for us. We also spend quite a bit of time going around and doing trainings with the VR offices so that they can understand our program and what the specific criteria are in that farm and ranch policy. The bottom result is that we have made a huge impact for our farmers and ranchers, and we have been able to get funding and assistive technology for many, many of our clients, which is really rewarding to see when they can actually, when they're able to do their work. It's a very rewarding process. Now, how does that AgrAbility and VR process work? First, the farmer contacts AgrAbility of Utah. Now, oftentimes it's not the farmer themselves, it is their wife or their kids, and they're saying, hey, I really think my dad needs some help. And so we will then reach out and we only work with them if they want to. And usually oftentimes it takes someone else nudging them along because most farmers are independent and proud and certain they don't have a disability. But we go and meet with them. We meet with them. Oftentimes we'll talk with them on the phone a little bit to get a general idea as to what's going on. We then go to their farm and we meet with them to generally assess the need and take a look around and get a good feel for what that operation looks like. If they look like it's a good fit, we give them a VR application. VR then assesses the VR eligibility, and that means they determine whether they meet their eligibility criteria as far as whether or not they have a disability. If the farmer or rancher does not meet VR's eligibility requirements, that doesn't mean we can't work with them. It just means VR wouldn't work with them. We can still work with them and help give them advice and guidance and identify any assistive technology or restructuring of tasks that may be helpful for them, but they would not qualify for VR services. If they meet the eligibility requirements, and I think by now we have this pretty well figured out, so they generally all meet those eligibility requirements, then VR will authorize an assessment. We go out and do the assessment, and that's a fairly in-depth thing. We will make the farmers climb on and off of tractors and their equipment to see what they're doing, because sometimes you'll go down there and they'll say, oh yeah, I can get on that tractor, and you ask them to actually get on it and they're climbing up the backside or they're really struggling and you're like, yeah, this looks like something that you might need some help with or assistance with. And then we put together a report and submit that to, um, well, actually, we review them for some other additional farm ranch criteria. But as we do that assessment, we're starting to identify assistive technology that would help them. So the next step, the farmer ranch criteria, in our farm ranch policy, those farmers have to meet four of the following five criteria to be eligible under the farm ranch policy. That doesn't mean they don't qualify for other VR services, but to be eligible under the farm ranch policy, the client has to self-identify as having farming or ranching as their primary occupation. They need to have been farming for the last 5 consecutive years or more, so they can't have just started last year. Their off-farm employment, they've got it worded, and this is how it's worded in the farm ranch policy, but saying the non-farm or ranch employment is the primary occupation for no more than 3 of the last 5 years. That to me, that's like a double negative. It really means that farming or ranching had to be their primary occupation for at least 2 of the last 5 years. They also need to have filed a Schedule F for at least 2 of the last 5 years or accounted in the tax form another way for the farm operation. There are a few ways you can structure farms so that they're a corporation or something instead, which may not file it as a Schedule F, but it has to have that farm operation being accounted for in the tax system. And at least 50% of the work hours or more are spent farming or ranching. So they need to meet 4 of those 5 criteria. In addition to that, we also review the farm viability. And so if that farm is in such bad shape and their health is in such poor shape that they, even if they got the assistive technology, that farm wouldn't be likely to be able to succeed and thrive, then they are likely to be denied by VR for that. So we do review the farm viability, and we also look at their ability to farm if assistive technology is provided. And on rare occasion, we'll get some who their limitations are so severe that they can't farm, even if we provided the assistive technology that they would like or that could be helpful. It would not be enough to be able to help them actually farm. It's not often, but we do run into that occasionally. If the client meets all of those requirements, then VR is willing to provide the assistive technology that helps them remain on the farm. Now, where do we run into some of the stumbling blocks? One of the biggest ones is that the farming is not their primary occupation. If you ask them and they say, "Oh yeah, farming's my primary occupation," and then you really start looking at it and it's really just a hobby. That's not where their primary income comes from. It's not where they're spending most of their time. And so VR is very, very critical on that one. The other one is, and this one we run into quite often on, this is where the farm structure comes into play. You either need to own and lease the farm and generate income, or you need to be working as like a farm worker or be paid for doing that farm work and earning an income. Oftentimes, we'll find where the spouse, like their mother, the husband and wife farmed, the husband died, the wife still owns the farm, but a son will run that farm for her. The son then, as he starts to get a little bit older and could use some assistive technology, applies, through VR and AgrAbility. And as we actually look at it, they're not paying that son anything. He's just doing all of that work for free. And that's noble and that's great, but that does not meet VR's requirements. If the mother would be paying the son some income to be helping work that farm for at least 2 years, then you could go back in and reapply. But they have to be earning an income to be able to meet the requirements, the VR farm ranch requirements. And they have to be able to farm with the assistive technology or restructuring of tasks. If there's nothing we can do or not enough that we can do to help make that work, then that can be a big problem. And it does have to be a viable operation. And sometimes we run into ones where it's been run down so far that there's no bringing it back, which is really too bad. So bottom line, at the part of the assessment, AgrAbility checks for the VR farmer rancher eligibility and those other criteria. If the client meets those criteria, the farm ranch criteria, then services through VR to help that farmer or rancher remain in agriculture are are worked on. And so then they will be looking at the assistive technology to help them remain in agriculture. If that client does not meet the farm ranch criteria, they can still be eligible for other VR services, but it won't be to help them remain in agriculture. It may be to help retrain them to be going to another field, or they can work with us for advice and guidance on how they can continue to farm and ranch through, with us. We're happy to help them identify that, but the funding, VR would not provide funding for them for the assistive technology for that farm. Now, one thing to really note right now, this is a fairly recent change and not a good change. VR recently went on an order of selection. This is not an ideal process in our world at all, nor VR's. But basically, as a client is entered into the system, they're assigned a category, and they really limit how many they process at any one time, and they only work with the most severe cases first, and then they work down to the second level and then the third level. but it's basically they don't have enough funding for everybody, and so they're trying to make sure that they can address the worst cases, and so it slows everything down. So right now, it was never a fast process, but expect it to take quite a bit longer for at least another year or two, would be my guess. We've been through this before, and it seemed like it really delayed things for a couple of years, and then it started to work back out of it, and they got out of it, and now we're back on an order of selection. So we'll see how long this takes. But if you're applying for this, it doesn't mean there's not funding. It doesn't mean you won't get assistive technology. Just expect that there may well be an even longer delay for that process to work because they're on an order of selection. And with that, I think that concludes our presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Or
Hey,
we,
thank you guys for that presentation. That was super insightful and helpful. I really enjoyed learning about what AgrAbility does. Sorry, I don't know if I just cut somebody off. Were you going to say something?
not me. Go ahead, guys.
And then everyone's always welcome to drop those questions in the chat as well if you don't feel comfortable going off mute. I actually did have a question. So, would like you say that different types of farmers in geographical regions get different types of, I guess, chronic illness or different types of disability compared to, like, let's say, a region more south?
Can you repeat that again? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, that might have been really long-winded.
No,
But I guess, like, do different types of farmers tend to get different types of chronic illness or disabilities due to their geographic location? Like, do you notice you guys giving more of a certain service to a certain location compared to another location?
yeah, so it will vary a lot just based on what your agriculture is like. So if you to where I grew up, especially eastern Nebraska, where I grew up, it's irrigated corn and soybeans. Iowa, Illinois, irrigated corn and soybeans. There's some livestock, but not nearly as much as here. So we will see a lot more injuries or, even if they have the same injuries or limitations, just our farmers are needing help with the feeding. And so the big round bale and rollers or things like that that can help make that feeding process easier for them, or the safe livestock handling equipment. And that's a lot of the assistive technology that we recommend because livestock are dangerous. I mean, especially cattle, the the big cows, they weigh a lot, and they can hurt you even if they don't mean to. They're way bigger than we are, and they can do damage. And mother cows with calves, if you're trying to treat a calf, they're very protective, and they can be very vicious if you're not careful. And so we will be recommending a lot of livestock handling equipment or assistive technology, um, things for more like we produce a lot of hay. The Midwest is producing grain crops for the Midwest for the most part. The South might have cotton, and so it'll be based a lot on, I would say the biggest differences are whether livestock is a predominant agriculture or cropping is. But then there's just different things that are needed for the different types of agriculture.
Ah, that's interesting. Thank you. And then I see that we have a question in the chat from Dan. He's asking, I've been hearing about GPS fence collars for cattle. Have you been finding that vocational rehab funds those as assistive technology?
We have not even gotten that far to request them. They're very expensive. I don't think we'd get that one through. To be real honest, I mean, because VR, their funds are limited, and so they kind of watch over it like a hawk. And so they would say that no, once you have a fence in, you don't need the collars to keep the cattle inside. And so I think they would say, no, you should just be trying to get a fence in. Now they work, they're beautiful. They have some wonderful attributes, and I think with time we'll see more and more farmers and ranchers have collars on the cattle, especially on the ranches and the range areas and some of that. I think they would be much more likely to maybe approve a drone to help them fly that drone to go check and see where the cattle are and things rather than having to try to get around on the range ground.
That
But
makes sense. Thank you.
And then to probably my last question, but that just made me think, oh, I already lost the question. What was it? It was supposed to be really good too, so I'm really sad that I lost the question. Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry. Um, well, would you say that a lot of like the assistive technology that you're providing, it helps more surrounding like mobility and those types of things rather than communication? Or would vocational rehab be more willing to fund assistive technology that helps out with mobility rather than communication? Sorry, that's like a double question.
I think we see a lot more issues with mobilities than communication, but VR has funded assistive technology to help with communication, and vision. We haven't had any issues getting that funding. We just don't have as many clients that have those, you know, relatively, there's way fewer clients that low vision or communication issues are the primary issue versus the mobility. The mobility is almost universal. I mean, because a lot of them, as they get older, they have arthritis, and it's hard for them to get around, and they have a lot of distance to cover. So
Mm.
I would say
Oh,
UTV is one of probably the most commonly recommended piece of assistive technology for our clients.
wow. Well, I'm gonna give it just a minute to see if any of our other participants have questions. You're welcome to raise your hand or drop them in the chat. Okay. That might be less than a minute. I'm sorry, but I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So I'd just like to thank you both, Randall and Rhonda, again for presenting on AgrAbility. I think it's a really great resource for a lot of the farmers, ranchers, and their families here in Utah. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And then I'll hand that time over now to Kent, who is going to present our case presentation. Do you have sharing privileges for your screen?
I guess I'll find out here in a second.
Okay.
Uh, Hang on, give me 1 second here to find the right tab. And I'll choose this one. Looks as though that might be sharing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds great. Okay. Um, well, Rhonda and Randall could maybe correct some of my slides here coming from a city slicker. I was a weekend farmer. I grew up in Provo. My family had a farm up in Midway. My dad would have us go up there on the weekends, and we just did basic work. He had 13 acres up there, and I usually carried rocks from one side of the field to the other to keep me busy. I feel like that was what was happening in my life. But so here's my case study. John is a 63-year-old farmer, rural Utah, who sustained a spinal cord injury, C6 level, 3 years ago when a large bale of hay fell from a stack and struck him on the head and caused the C6 spinal cord injury. They have a 500-acre farm that primarily produces hay and alfalfa. Prior to his injury, he independently managed most of the planting, harvesting, flood irrigation, equipment maintenance, and the business side of the operations. He's married. His wife works full-time away from the farm, but he has a son that's 29 years old that does more of the physically demanding tasks on the farm. Since the injury, John uses a power wheelchair full-time, but he is able to transfer independently. He remains actively involved in the farm and wants to continue working as long as he can. Um, Some of the primary areas of concern for him is he can no longer safely access several pieces of the farm equipment. Transferring onto tractors and other machinery has become increasingly difficult and potentially dangerous. Flood irrigation requires frequent travel to the uneven terrain and open and close some of the water gates that they have to use to water the crops. The son is taking an increasing workload, creating concerns about his long-term sustainability on the farm. And equipment modifications will be expensive, probably not maybe. The family wants John to remain productive and involved in farm operations as much and as long as he can. So this is what I came up with. Of course, the goals and barriers for him. Um, he would like to continue operating the tractors and the farm equipment to remain independent and do a lot of that work himself. Increasing safety during transfers and equipment operations has become more and more involved and dangerous, looking out for his safety. He would like to improve access to irrigation controls and water management because it's all mostly been more physical than automated. Reduce physical strain on both John and his son is a goal that way, if possible. So those barriers, aging farm equipment that they may need to deal with, the modification of those is the biggest barrier in allowing him to still operate those pieces of farm equipment. And then the financial resources are limited. What options may he have to help with some of these modifications as part of the barriers to their farm work? The uneven terrain creates accessibility challenges in his wheelchair. Um, these are difficult to present because we can't give you the full picture of what he may be dealing with, how many, you know, side-by-side farm equipment he might have. So in our breakouts, we'll just kind of have to walk through some of this and make some educated guess on how we might want to help John on his farm. So questions for discussion. What services and assessments are out there and what may be both most beneficial? Sorry. And I think Rhonda and Randall did a great job explaining those for us. So that should translate pretty well. What tractors access solutions should be considered? These are difficult, I think, for a lot of us that don't know what's out there and available. Along with the flood irrigation management, how could they be potentially modified and automated a little bit? Funding resources, we did learn a lot about that, so that'll be a great discussion in our breakout sessions. What other safety concerns should be addressed when operating heavy farm equipment and additional farm tasks that may be adapted to allow John to remain more actively engaged in his daily operations? So that is my initial case study for our AgrAbility session here. Janelle, something I'm missing or something that you need to add, or Leo, before we move into our next session or the breakout sessions?
No, I think it's all good. I think we're good to open up the breakout rooms now.
Okay, Leo, everybody's back.
All right, thank you. So I thought we had a really great discussion. I actually took notes for Dan in our group, so I'm just going to go over a little quick overview or maybe summary. I think a lot of mostly what we talked about is that perhaps we needed a bit more of the specifics of the farm. Just how does the farm look like? How big is the farm? What equipment does this farmer have? And just a lot more of those specifics, because once we do know those specifics, we're able to modify like that certain equipment or just give him more specified information and additional supports. I think, though, there were some pretty good solutions just in general that were given as well. I mean, somebody mentioned coach lifts. They could either do bars or lifts, and they have platforms. And Dan even pulled up a picture of it on his screen to show the group. And I think Dan also did a project surrounding that water irrigation. I don't know if he wants to speak on it more or not, but I think it was through the Instructables website that he had pulled it up through. So I thought that was really interesting and perhaps a solution for, irrigation management for John. Um, we also talked about some funding sources that may be available, and besides maybe, oh, I'm trying to think of because I even wrote them down. Okay. Dan, I think, mentioned there could even be disability specific funding that perhaps this farmer could coordinate with. There's also UATF and just some great farming or some great resources. But lastly, I think the main point was to just have this farmer do an assessment with AgrAbility, because once that assessment happens, then that gives it the bright line for more positive things to come and for those modifications to happen and, hopefully approval. And then I'll ask our other group, I don't know if it was Ken or Lisa who took notes, but if either of you would like to share.
Yeah, it was me. I took some notes on the what safety concerns should be addressed when operating heavy equipment. Um, Rhonda stated that the safe entrance and exit is at the top of the list when we look at spinal cord injuries and on any any equipment that we're looking at. We always want to make sure that they're safe entering and exiting. Rhonda says that it's not difficult to implement the modified hand controls into their existing tractors. And then Carrie stated that any kind of pinch point in those tractors should be maybe spotted or looked at and made sure that that would be eliminated. And Ed said that also that hydration and cooling abilities may be a great thing to think about. Smartwatches may be implemented and a good option. And then we also talked about what additional farm tasks might be adapted to allow John to remain actively engaged in daily operation? And Rhonda mentioned that he can still maybe be the chief decision maker with the right modifications. Any farmer can be on the farm. She's seen where many farmers that are in wheelchairs are still operating the farm and are farming. And the farmers themselves need to prioritize what is most important to them. Ken asked about tractors that are self-driving and maybe automated and just drive themselves. And Rhonda said, we're not there yet, but we probably are getting there. But those are not available currently. But that might be a really great next step, is what we were talking about.
It sounded like you guys had a good conversation. I really liked how you mentioned how it's just basically increasing their independence. It's even off of that presentation. I mean, farmers are fiercely independent and they value that. So I think it's really great. And I think you guys had a wonderful conversation. So I think I will end it here, but make sure that you join us for our next session in August. It'll be August 4th at 12 p.m. MST. And if you'd like to access the case recommendations that we came up with for this session, you're always welcome to email projectecho@usu.edu for access to that Canvas page where, again, you can get additional resources, you can watch previous session recordings, and you can view those case recommendations that we talked about today. So, and again, don't forget to take that survey that Janelle has been dropping that survey link throughout the chat. It gives you that certificate of attendance that you can show to your employer for continuing education credits or professional credits. So thank you guys so much. And I hope to see you in August.